Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. We are very excited to take you on a walk through Uncle Val's garden. Now, I personally am a huge gin fan, and so I wish that Uncle Val was actually my Uncle Val, but I will take a virtual / only available in our stores type of uncle if that's what it takes to get some fabulous gin for myself. So we're really excited to have Eric on with us tonight. And of course, our spirits marketing specialist, Mark Roy. For those of you watching via Zoom, thank you for pre-registering. Please go ahead and leave any questions or comments in the chat bar here on Zoom. And if you are watching on Facebook, you can go ahead and leave any questions or comments in the comment section of Facebook. So Eric, I'm going to let you take it away. We are so excited to have a little Friday night gin tasting with you.
Perfect. Well, appreciate that, Kellen. It's looking forward to have everybody on, obviously virtually. Hopefully some of you are drinking along with us at home, so to speak, as we kind of walk through Uncle Val's garden. I want to make sure you can actually see the presentation full screen. Okay, are we good? So
it's not up yet. Bear with us for a second, everyone. If you want to leave some questions while we get the presentation going, or I mean, if you want to, have a little sip while you wait, we won't stop you. Here it comes.
Here we go. Now we should be good. We good?
Yes, it is now full screen. It took a minute to load, but it's looking good.
It's because it's all the delicious botanicals going in there together to make a great gin. So it took a little time. Our apologies. Well, first off, thank you for joining us here tonight. We're going to take a quick walk through Uncle Val's garden and talk about Uncle Val's handcrafted gin. So one of the first questions we often get is, who is Uncle Val? And was Uncle Val a real person? So when we think about gin, there's a lot of gins out there. I'm not going to name any by name, but there's a few that are owned by celebrities that just might happen to be an actor. And I've always asked, what does an actor know about gin? What does he know about botanicals? And that actor may know some stuff about it, but I can certainly tell you that Uncle Val knew a lot about botanicals and he knew a lot about gardening. The Uncle Val behind Uncle Val's gin is actually Dr. VALERIO CECCHETTI. So Dr. VALERIO CECCHETTI is actually the uncle of our founder, August Sebastiani, and actually the namesake for Uncle Val's gin. He lived in Italy, just outside of Lucca, Italy. He was actually a doctor by trade, a bicyclist, a cook, but most of all, he loved his garden. So when you think about gin, obviously there's a lot of botanicals that go into gin. There's a lot of components. And the inspiration for Uncle Val's gin was really what he had in his garden and what he really loved to tend and what he loved to pull out of his garden. So you can actually see a picture of Uncle Val from his earlier days. He's the gentleman who looks like a Monsignor. He was actually going to be a pastor, if you will, but decided to go into medicine instead. And you can see older Uncle Val behind his niece and his cousin there in Italy from 2004. So Uncle Val actually lived from 1922 to 2013, and he was able to see his ideas come to fruition in Uncle Val's gin before he passed away. So for those of you obviously wondering why Uncle Val, again, he's the inspiration behind everything in our gins. So when you look at the gin portfolio for Uncle Val's, you actually have three expressions currently: botanical, restorative, and peppered. And what we're going to do is kind of walk through gin. For those of you that may know a little bit about gin, we'll kind of go through what the different styles are, and then we're really going to get into each individual expression of Uncle Val's and share how you can use it, what it tastes like, what the botanicals going into it are, and a little bit of those flavor profiles that make it what it is. So kind of starting out, we want to talk about what Uncle Val's is. It is a handcrafted gin. We use a corn base, which is unique because not a lot of gins use a corn base. So it is naturally gluten-free from that perspective by using the corn. We use actually an aquifer water from the Sonoran Desert. So very, very clean water. And it's coming from the Cascade Mountains as well. So when we're making this neutral spirit, you've got to think about when you're using basically a gin, you've got to have a great base because that's really the heart of it after the botanicals. So we distill this 5 times for purity, and then we bring in all the botanicals, and this is what's called a compound gin. So when you look at the different styles of gin, you really start and go back to Genever, which goes back to the Dutch Genevier. So really gin comes from this compound, if you will. Juniper is always the key component for a gin. A gin will always include juniper. So from a style standpoint, though, you have several different types. As I mentioned earlier, Uncle Val's is a compound gin. You do have just a regular gin, a distilled gin, and a London gin. And then within those categories, you have pot distilled, column distilled as well. So there's a lot of different components that go into what make gin gin. But ultimately, it's what you enjoy and what you like to taste. So as we get into gin, going back to thought process, compound gin is much like putting a tea bag in a bag of hot water. All these botanicals are in this large bag, and they're basically steeping in the neutral grain base. So basically for a compound gin, you have all these botanicals that are fresh, and they're literally just sitting there bobbing up and down, and the gin is basically being created through that infusion into the gin. So before I go any further with that, Caroline, I want to see if there's any questions that I can answer before we get into the specifics of what Uncle Val's is and what the different styles of gin we have.
So Eric, I feel like you might cover this as we keep going, but one of our participants here on Zoom would like to know, what is the spirit used for the base of the botanical infusion for your gin?
So it's a neutral grain base, which is primarily what almost all gins are. So they can be a wheat base, it can be a wheat distillate, it can be a grain distillate, it can be a corn distillate. You could have really anything. And when I say a neutral grain base, think about vodka. Vodka starts with a neutral grain base and then is then distilled. And when you think about flavored vodka, obviously they're adding flavors. For lack of a better, broader description, you can think of gin as a flavored vodka to a certain extent that just has to include juniper from a production process standpoint.
Very cool.
So you really don't need vodka. You've got gin, which is your flavored vodka. So when you look at gin, obviously, one of the first things that people have an understanding in their first experience with gin may not have been a favorable one, because they got into something that was basically a lot of juniper forward, which obviously you have. Uncle Val's Botanical is not a juniper forward gin. It is more of a citrus forward gin. So when I talk about juniper forward, there's a lot of brands in the market. Obviously, that style is prevalent. With Uncle Val's Botanical, yes, it does include juniper in the botanicals, but it's not about being a juniper forward gin. So there are 5 main components for Uncle Val's Botanical. Juniper, obviously, which you'll see across the board in all 3 of our expressions, cucumber, lemon, lavender, and sage. And so you ask, why these botanicals in Uncle Val's? Again, this goes back to what Uncle Val had in his garden in Lucca, Italy. So everything within the next 3 expressions you see from Uncle Val's, botanical, restorative, and then peppered, everything that goes into what makes these their actual expressions came from his garden. These were the inspiration. So when we look at the balance of these, obviously juniper, again, being the primary component to be a gin, we wanted to balance out the different flavor profiles. So in Uncle Val's Botanical, as I mentioned, juniper, which you have to have, cucumber, there's a little bit of coolness, there's a subtle flavor profile to it. The lemon, obviously the citrus component. The sage has a little bit of a dryness to it. It gives it an aromatic flavor profile. And then the lavender obviously gives it a more floral aspect as well. So for those of you drinking along at home, I've got the Botanical in front of me. And if you can just nose it, you don't get that juniper right on the front of the nose. You get a lot of lemon, you get a little bit of the cucumber, and you get the lavender coming through on the nose. It actually has a beautiful smell to it, a beautiful aroma to it. I mean, you could probably use it as a little bit of cologne if you really wanted to in a pinch. So it really does have a beautiful flavor profile. Now, when you're drinking this, this is a 90 proof gin. So it makes a beautiful martini. It goes great in a Collins. You can make a fantastic Negroni with this with a white vermouth. and also probably a little bit lighter, not necessarily using a Campari, but probably a Suze. On its own, actually, believe it or not, you can put this in an ice cube and drink it neat. Also makes a great bee's knees. So when you're thinking about the components going into it as well, when you're making a cocktail, you want to make sure that you're thinking about how you're using it as it relates to the other flavors. So one thing with Uncle Val's and the entire portfolio, we wanted to provide versatility in terms of what you can make with it. And that's why we have the 3 different expressions. Of all 3 of them, Botanical is our biggest seller, because of the fact that for someone who may not necessarily like gin, when you try this, you're not getting that juniper forward like you find with a lot of gins. You're getting the citrus, you're getting the floral. I just love the smell. I'm sorry, I have to go back to it. So as you can see here from a flavor profile, this is actually an American style gin. There's London style gins, there's Spanish gins. And really, like I said, from a flavor perspective, think about how you're using gin, much like what you have in the garden. It's almost like cooking. When you're making gin, you're combining all these components to create balance. You don't want necessarily one botanical to overpower another. Otherwise, that's all you're going to get on your palate. It is about different flavors and how they're married together. So kind of when you're looking at this, you kind of see how you can do it. It talks a little bit about what the botanicals are, how you're getting that flavor profile, and what you can do from a cocktail perspective. And if you check out the website for Uncle Val's, we have a lot of cocktail recommendations as well that we can share with you there. So before I move on to restorative, I want to see if there's any questions on botanical.
So Eric, somebody on Facebook is curious if you could share a little bit more about what makes the different types of gin different, the London versus Spanish versus American.
Well, it goes back to really some of the distilling styles. So when you think about gin itself, gin is basically a juniper flavored, the generic definition of gin is a juniper flavored spirit that isn't necessarily involving botanicals or redistillation. They're simply adding a natural flavor of juniper to the product, which actually has to have a minimum strength of 37.5% ABV. Distilled gin is actually using the ethanol, taking it to an initial strength of 96, with probably, you can use a small kettle still, a pot still to make this. And then actually the gin basket goes into the still itself. So in this gin basket, it sits in the still, and you have the juniper and other botanicals that create that flavor. And for that as well, it has to have a minimum strength of 37.5. London style gin actually has a little bit more flavor. They use the redistillation. It's actually at a lower proof first when you're distilling it. And hopefully I'm not getting too technical here because there's a lot to this. So, and as you're doing that, you're not adding anything to it other than really the gin, the water, and a little bit of botanicals. It's more of a drier gin. And that's really where you get a lot of that juniper note. And that's really most people's first experience is with a London dry gin. Pot still gin, again, going back to that distilled gin, is really about the grain mash, the alcohol, the ABV. If memory serves me, I think it's 68% on the pot still. So again, they're using different pot stills. You get different distillate. Botanicals go in as well. And then you get smaller batches from a pot still. Column stills, which also is a coffee still, is a very large still that the gin continues to go up and goes through the plates. And then they're infusing it as well. So the gin basket is suspended in the pot still, and it's also suspended in the column still as well. So hopefully that gives a little bit of it's hard to describe without showing you pictures. And unfortunately, we don't have a full spread of all the different styles and all the different columns. And it's very complicated when you look at what gin is. There's different alcohol percentages, different sugar percentages. There's a lot of different styles, obviously.
Well, Eric, I think that was a great description. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of additional information about those other types.
And also, too, you have to think gin goes back quite some time. And, gin really predates, I think, right around 1500 in terms of when it was being used. And at one point, they actually have basically had a gin tax in England on all the stills because they were producing so much gin, and that was really kind of funding a lot of things in England because of all the gin stills. So going into the next flavor profile, restorative, And as I talk about the different flavors in restorative, I want you to think about them in correlation with talking about botanical. Because as I mentioned, these are all three very unique, very different styles of gin. Very floral and citrus on the botanical, whereas restorative is much along the lines of, for example, I'll use Hendrix. Obviously, has that cucumber forward. So juniper, coriander, cucumber, and rose petal. So when you're thinking about from a cocktail standpoint, this is going to be probably the closest to a London dry style gin. So when you're looking to make a martini, this makes a beautiful martini. It's a little bit drier than botanical. The cucumber and the rose petal come through very, very clearly. And then the coriander adds an element of dryness and also a little bit of savory note to the finish. So this is what we traditionally use for martinis. We use this for Negronis. It also makes a great Collins as well. And again, this is something you can actually drink neat. So when you're looking at these different botanicals going into it, we're using only the freshest botanicals. We source the botanicals from the freshest locations. We don't want to use something that's not fresh, because when you do that, it adds a dryness and doesn't give a balance to the gin. So we really want to make sure when you're distilling gin, that your gin that you're drinking is using fresh botanicals, because if not, it's not going to give you a full-on flavor. There are also other gins on the market that use basically the essence of a botanical. So instead of using the actual cucumber or the actual rose petal, they're using a liquid to give that flavor profile to the gin. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It still makes a good gin, but you really want to look for someone that's using fresh botanicals, because the flavor ultimately comes through in the finished product. So as I mentioned a little bit about the flavor profile, really giving the coriander, making it pop in terms of the savory aspect, balanced out by the cucumber, and then also finishing with that rose petal. So everything, again, that we talked about, all inspired by Uncle Val, what he had in his garden and what he wanted to share with the consumer. So he shared a lot of this ideas with his nephew, August Sebastiani, our founder. August took down quite a few notes, and we're going to continue to offer new expressions coming down. And at the end, I'll share one of our newest expressions that's coming next year. So we do have quite a few things that Uncle Val recommended before his passing, and you're going to continue to see more and more flavors coming through. One thing about restorative, which is unique, so as I talked about earlier, London is really the capital of gin, is kind of what they consider the capital of gin. Uncle Val's Restorative actually won the Best American Gin at the World Gin Awards last year in London. So we're very, very proud of that. So very unique for our product, obviously, to stand out in the category, especially in gin's backyard. Any questions that I can answer on restorative?
Yes, so let's see here. Somebody is interested in making a martini with it, and they want to know, oh my gosh, where did it just go? Oh, there it is. What else do you add when you're making a martini with the restorative? Do you still go with vermouth, or would you add anything differently?
Well, it really is individual preference. I mean, ultimately, when I'm making a martini, I'm basically just shaking this over ice. It's okay to shake it. You're not going to bruise the gin. I'm shaking it over ice, straining it into the glass, and then drinking it. Some people like to add a little vermouth to that when they're shaking it. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes you say, okay, well, you take the glass, you rinse it out a little bit with vermouth, and then you can dump it out. And then obviously chill the glass with ice water before you shake the gin, the Uncle Val's, in the shaker, and then strain it in. So you obviously always want to use a chilled martini glass whenever possible. It's going to keep it cold. And sometimes people say, you know, just open the vermouth, look at it, put it away, and then just use the gin. So it really is individual preference. There's really no right or wrong answer when it comes to drinking a martini, as long as you enjoy the taste. And it really boils down to that. So, you know, personally, we have some people that use a little bit of vermouth, like I said, maybe a 1/4 ounce. Some people will rinse the glass. Obviously, some people include blue cheese stuffed olives or a little bit of olive juice to make a dirty martini. Again, much like gin, there are so many different recipes that you can go through in a martini. It really boils down to what you enjoy the best.
Cool. So Eric, you just mentioned something about bruising the gin. What does that mean? Gin can be bruised?
it's got feelings. It gets hurt sometimes if you're not
Oh.
making a cocktail the right way. When you say bruise the gin, there's an analogy that by oxygenating the gin, by shaking it too much with the ice, you can actually lose some of the botanical flavor. It's kind of somewhat of a fallacy, but it does get brought up. When you're making a Negroni, you certainly don't want to shake a Negroni. You really want to stir a Negroni as opposed to shaking a martini. So there are different cocktails that you're going to stir just from number one, a flavor profile standpoint. So for example, if I'm making Negroni, I'm using 1 ounce of Uncle Val's Restorative, 1 ounce of La Pivone Rojo Vermouth, which is our vermouth, and then usually 1 ounce of Campari. And all I'm going to do is stir that. I'm not going to shake it.
Awesome. All right, one more question before we let you move on to the next gin. Does Uncle Val's get proofed down before or after the botanicals are infused?
It gets proofed down after the botanicals are added, actually. Because when we proof it down, we want to make sure that all the botanicals are in there first, because if we proof it down before then, you're going to lose some of the flavor and the balance. So we have to have it proofed up, and then we'll cut it back. And that way, if we need to add additional compounding once it's done, we can go back and recompound.
Cool. Awesome, thank you.
So actually getting into the last one, which really, I love all these equally, allegedly, they're all my kids. This is really one of my favorites because it's often the most misunderstood. So Uncle Val's pepper gin is really unique in that it is peppered, it is vegetal, it is savory. Now, when I say peppered, the traditional thought when you say peppered is, oh, it's gonna have a lot of heat to it. That's not the case with Uncle Val's peppered. Obviously, again, juniper, red bell pepper, black pepper, and pimento. So by adding all these peppers to Uncle Val's pepper, it certainly gives it a savory component. So if I'm smelling this, you almost get a little smoke like a grilled pepper. And then when you drink it, it's more vegetal and savory than it is heat. So from a versatility standpoint, it gives us something different. And obviously, a lot of people put vodka into a Bloody Mary. If you put this in a Bloody Mary, it's actually called a red snapper. So anytime you use gin in a Bloody Mary, it's a red snapper. So this, especially if you want to spice up and give your Bloody Mary, red snapper, if you will, more flavor, Uncle Val's pepper gives it that opportunity. And the reason we use pepper is obviously because Uncle Val had a lot of peppers in his garden. And we wanted to provide something that was, again, very unique from a flavor profile standpoint than everything else in the category. So when you're making a cocktail with this, as I mentioned, the red snapper, you can also do a bee's knees, which is a variation. Using this with the honey and the lemon makes an absolutely fantastic bee's knees. This also makes a perfect Negroni using La Pivone Rojo or any more of a red vermouth, if you will, a drier vermouth, but then also using Chinar, which is an artichoke liqueur. So those three together in a stair step. And when I say stair step, you're using 1.5 ounces of Uncle Val's peppered, using 3/4 ounce vermouth, and then basically 1/2 ounce of the Chinar. Because Chinar is a very powerful aperitif that will obviously overpower it from an artichoke standpoint. So you want to use a little bit less of that. But from a Negroni perspective, like I said, you really have 3 different styles of Negronis that you can make with Uncle Val's between the botanical, the restorative, and the peppered. And really with this one, it's something where you can't be afraid of it. It does not have a lot of heat to it. It's not about capsaicin. It really is about being savory. So you can kind of see, like I said, the peppercorns coming through the pepper. There's a smokiness to it, almost like a mezcal, kind of going back to our conversation a few weeks back when we talked about Bozal mezcal. There is an inherent smokiness to that because of the roasting process for these peppers. But there's also a balance between them. There's a balance between the savory, the sweet, and the spice, which makes it absolutely fantastic from a cocktail standpoint. Questions that I can answer on Uncle Val's peppered?
So, Mark, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but we do have a question coming in. Somebody wants to know if the peppered is available at the Portsmouth Traffic Circle store.
Unfortunately, the peppered is not quite available yet in New Hampshire. We are expecting it in the springtime. As you can imagine, It's kind of like when you change your clothes from summer to fall and then fall to the winter. For our test period, we kind of are strategic about when we launch products. So this product will be launching in the early springtime, and you should see it in our shelves during that time frame. But the other two, the Botanical is available in all locations, and the Restorative is currently in our 36 specialty stores, and they're both on sale right now for $29.99. So you can try the first two and keep your eyes peeled for the second one. And actually, I have a question for Eric while I'm on the line. I noticed when you talk about the botanicals and you list them, and I know when I do a lot of my research and I look up gin, because I'm not particular London dry style, big juniper forward, which these aren't. Is there a rhyme or a reason as to the way they list the botanicals? Because you guys lead with juniper, and it's not a big juniper forward. So does that tie into how much you use, or is that why it's listed first, or anything of that nature?
No, we don't necessarily have them in any specific order. We just have them on there. That's kind of, we talk about them that way. And obviously juniper is leading because to be a gin, as I mentioned earlier, you always have to have that juniper component. And that's really why it's on there. But going back and looking at it, there's no really order in terms of which is more than another in the batch, because these are also all batches of gin. So everyone's going to be a little bit different. While we strive for consistency from batch to batch, we don't always have the same profile over and over and over. You're going to get a little bit of differentiation, which is kind of unique because we are creating these, each batch is different. It's not something where we're consistently distilling all the time. As I mentioned, with this being a compound gin, that bag steeping in there of the botanicals is going to change, even though we may use similar quantities of the different botanicals. Depending on how they are in the bag, you're going to get some different flavor profiles and different blends. So there is a little bit of variation from batch to batch, which is actually why too, I know you can kind of see it here a little bit down on the bottom, we actually have a batch number and a bottle number for each one. So for example, if you get a couple different batches of Uncle Val's, you can certainly try those bottles side by side, and you may pick up some different flavor profiles and some different nuances within the gin itself. You're always going to have the same botanicals, but again, from an overall flavor perspective, you may get some variation from batch to batch.
So Eric, while we wait to get the peppered here in New Hampshire, people want to know, how are you drinking it?
How am I drinking it? It really depends on my mood. I think ultimately, I'm actually in Indiana right now. It's at about 38 degrees. So what I would do is I'd have probably a peppered Negroni, as I said, with Chinar and a little bit of La Pivot Rojo, on a nice fall day, a nice restorative. Martini's fantastic. I don't use any vermouth. I'm pretty much just gin, ice, and that's about it. And then really the botanical is the star of the show. Not that it's any better than the other ones. Because of the versatility though, on a nice hot summer day, a Collins with botanical, you can't beat it. The lemon really comes through on this. The flavor profile is phenomenal. So basically just a little bit of sweet and sour sometimes. This, a nice squeeze of lemon juice, call it a day. And if it's really, really hot out, you can just pretty much grab a big ice cube, pour it over the ice, and call it an afternoon.
So I know you just told us that you're in Indiana, but your background looks a little bit lush. Can you tell us about where we are virtually with you?
So virtually, this is actually outside of Lucca, Italy. This is near Uncle Valerio Cecchetti's hometown. He grew up in Lucca, lived in Lucca. So this is kind of a back shot of just outside of Lucca, the Italian countryside, if you will. So yes, I'd love to be there. And obviously, since we are virtual, I can take you there. I wish that we could walk through Uncle Val's garden, but unfortunately it's no longer there. So that's why we're doing this virtually.
And for those of you who might just be joining us on Facebook, Uncle Val really is the uncle of the founder of the gin. So how cool is that? Like, this brand really is named after somebody's uncle. I love that. I think that is such a cool little tidbit to this brand.
He's not an actor. And personally, I think he's a little bit better looking than the actor was. So I'll just throw that in there.
Awesome.
I'm not going to mention his name because I can't do that tomorrow. And then lastly, really the other thing we wanted to share, I kind of alluded earlier that we do have another expression coming. We're excited to launch, and actually you're the first consumers to hear about this. We'll be launching Uncle Val's Zested in probably June of next year. And Zested will actually be a blend of juniper, coriander, malted barley, and bergamot orange. It's absolutely fantastic. It's got a beautiful orange profile to it with a little bit of malt. And for those of you familiar with Genevieve, that malted barley really was a key component in the history of Genevieve, which is gin's predecessor. So we're very excited to share that news and look forward to hopefully everyone being able to try that in the very near future as well.
Man, 2021 is just going to be a great year for gin here in New Hampshire, guys.
2020 is a great year for gin too. You can drink it right now.
That's very true. I think we all might need to drink some gin right now.
And Eric, I already spilled the beans in the chat box on the right to the people watching on Zoom, so you're not hurting my feelings.
What's that? I'm sorry.
The actor that you mentioned earlier, I spilled the beans in the chat on the side, so.
He's a nice guy. I can't say anything bad about Mr. Reynolds. He's a nice guy. Aviation's a great brand, and it obviously gives a category more opportunity for exposure. So, but we'd recommend trying Uncle Val's first.
I agree. There's got to be something to said, as I said in the chat on the side to the people that are watching on Zoom, that there's got to be something to it with the fact of the number of people, celebrities that are getting into the wine and spirits industry. It's certainly helping to get everything out there, but there's got to be a draw to it for sure, because everybody's jumping into the pool. So
they are, and really, I think ultimately, if you want to look at it this way, Uncle Val was the original celebrity. Everything he did, he was a jack of all trades, and quite the Renaissance man in terms of what he did and what he was. So that's to your point, Caroline. That's the beauty of Uncle Val's. He was a real person. This is a real gin, and it's really delicious too. So
awesome. We do have a few more questions for Eric, but before we get to those, I do just want to talk a little bit about our 90 Days Around the World program, because I really feel like tonight is a perfect example of we are literally around the world. Mark and I are here in New Hampshire. Eric's in Indiana. He's showing us this gin that has roots in Italy. We have people on the line watching tonight from Quebec and from California. We are, we're all over the place tonight, and we're having a blast. So for those of you who have joined some of our other events, you already know about our virtual passport. So for tonight, the code word for your virtual passport is botanical. And for those of you who this might be your first virtual event with us, we have a virtual passport program. You can earn points for every event that you attend. You enter the code word into the app, you get 100 points. And the more points you earn, the closer you are to winning our Ultimate Home Bar sweepstakes. So that is a $2,500 gift card to our stores, and some one-on-one guidance from Mark, who is here with us tonight, and from our wine buyers, Lisa and Chad, to help you stock your Ultimate Home Bar. So if you are interested in that, I'm going to put the link to the information about how to download the app in the comments on Zoom, in the chat, and then on the comments, on Facebook. So you can find that app, enter the code word for tonight, botanical, and get you a little bit closer to being eligible for that Ultimate Home Bar.
am I eligible for that?
What was that, Eric?
I said, am I eligible for that?
I think you might be. You're going to have to attend.
Uncle Val's bar. Well, we are including some great Uncle Val's barware for that home bar program as well. So
great. I mean, Eric would already have 200 points because this is his second event with us. So he would be closer than some. So, all right, we do have a few additional questions for Eric and a couple from Mark as well. So let's get into those. So Eric, we've got some fans of gin and tonic on the line, and they are wondering if you have a suggestion for which Uncle Val's to use for a gin and tonic, and if you have a preferred tonic.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Really all of them work for a gin and tonic. It really depends on what mood you're in and what flavor profile you're looking for. Botanical and tonic is certainly very easy to do with a lemon. slice or a lemon wedge as opposed to a lime. Restorative goes great with tonic and a cucumber. There's actually a rose tonic from Fentimans, I believe, that goes perfectly with the restorative. And then peppered, actually, you can do a little bit of a bell pepper garnish or a black pepper garnish with tonic as well. And I would probably use a lemon with that as well. And really, I think from a tonic standpoint, as long as you're using a premium tonic, I'm trying to remember, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, what you guys have in store from a tonic perspective.
We have Fever Tree and tonics. Yep.
Yeah, Fever Tree is a great product. It really goes well with Uncle Val's. And really, you know, when you're looking at making a cocktail, remember, if you're using a affordable luxury product like Uncle Val's, you should always use a premium mixer. Obviously, from a flavor profile perspective, if you're using a lesser quality product that has a lot of sugar and not necessarily a natural flavor to it, you're not going to have a good cocktail. So if you are making a gin and tonic, I would recommend using Fever Tree or Fentimans or one of the better brands that's actually not just necessarily your everyday Schweppes or something along those lines tonic.
Awesome. And so then Eric, for the new Uncle Val's that's going to be coming, one of our attendees here on Zoom would like to know, will the barley be part of the zest mash or part of the botanicals?
It's actually parting the mash. So it's going to be part of the distillation process.
And so Mark, follow up for you in regards to that new product. The people want to know, are we going to be getting that one too?
Well, as you can tell, Eric's a pretty good salesman, so I'm sure that Eric and his local broker, Horizon Beverage here, who we're good partners here with in New Hampshire, will be having a Zoom meeting of our own, and we'll be talking about the release of the peppered and also this new product for next summer as well. So, you know, with the success of the first two that we have in store already, that's kind of how products make their way into our stores and continue to grow in our stores. They'll start with, you know, the restorative mark, and now that they got, the botanical mark, and now they have the restorative out there, we'll keep expanding the line from Uncle Val's as long as we have the customers out there that are picking it off the shelves. So keep buying Uncle Val's and we'll keep bringing in the products.
Uncle Val's, please.
Great.
And I will say this too, you know, the New Hampshire stores, and I gave all the credit in the world to Mark, and I gave him the credit last time too on our previous call. New Hampshire actually has some of the best selection of any control state in the United States. And I think a lot of that is due to the team and really to Mark too. So kudos to Mark and the team for really giving the stores the opportunity to have the selection that they have and carry some of the best options, if you will, in the industry. So.
Awesome. So Eric, some of our attendees want to know, gin, better kept in the fridge or on the counter?
You know, you really don't need to chill it. I think it's perfectly fine. You know, you can keep it on the counter. And then, as I said, if you're making a martini, you certainly want to shake it over ice. But on the counter is fine. It really doesn't need to be refrigerated.
Cool. So Mark, next one is for you. If you guys on the line tonight had tuned in at all over the summer, you will probably recognize this question. Mark and I got this question a lot over the summer, and it's been brought back tonight. Somebody would like to know what Mark is drinking tonight.
What I am drinking tonight, it's funny you should ask. Before we got on the air, I said to Eric that he should feel special because it's a Friday night and he's cutting into my research and development time. But no, this time of year, I'm a big whiskey fan. So with the impending storm coming tomorrow and the chill coming down, I'll probably be doing a couple whiskey drinks and I'll finish the night off. I'm a big fan of a cask strength whiskey over a 2-inch ice sphere and just about 2 fingers and sip that one. I call that my by the fire good night drink. So I'll probably be having a little whiskey tonight.
Awesome. All right. So Eric,
I'd like to pose it back to the folks watching at home and watching on Facebook. What are you all drinking tonight? That's the better question.
Oh, well, while we give people a chance to answer, I'll tell you what I'm drinking. So I knew we were going to be talking to you tonight, Eric, so that got me in the mood for gin. And I'm a big fan of a Pimm's cup. So I actually made some ginger Pimm's cup with blood oranges that I'm going to have with my dinner later.
Beautiful.
So Carolyn, I'm gonna put Eric on the spot. One of our people watching on Zoom asked a really good question. So as Eric probably knows, that we're seeing a little bit of increase in the gin category for Tomcat gins. So is there any plans for Uncle Val's to do a barrel aged version or anything like that coming down the line?
You know, we always have innovation with three badge mixology. Our portfolio lends itself to innovation. We do have a lot of expressions in the pipeline. From a research and development standpoint, we do have some other opportunities and options coming with Uncle Val's. We've looked at a London Dry. We've looked at a Navy Strength. As of right now, we've not looked at a barrel aged. That being said, we are looking at some other barrel aged projects for possibly our tequila, to age Pozote tequila in a Kirk and Sweeney barrel. So maybe we can play around with a little bit of innovation and see what we can do by aging it in a rum barrel.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And just to tempt you a little bit more, as you know, New Hampshire has an incredible single barrel program, and we have done some single barrel Tomcats in the past with some pretty good success. So, you know, if you guys are thinking about it and you want to test the waters here in New Hampshire, we'd be happy to indulge.
We're always looking at new products and new innovation for our portfolio. It's something we really strive on. We are certainly not satisfied with just staying where we are. So I will certainly pass that along to our production team and see what we could have in the pipeline for 2021, if not 2022.
Awesome. All right. Well, the comments have started coming in about what everybody's drinking tonight. It's all looking good. So David here on Zoom, it looks like he went and picked up the Botanical and the Restorative Uncle Val's. David, I hope that you had your coupon ready. Everybody who pre-registered received a coupon for Uncle Val's. So please be sure to pre-register for future events if you'd like to receive some awesome coupons. So the coupon for tonight was $5 off 2 bottles. So you got to try, you know, you could taste along tonight with both bottles, save $5. Maybe it was your first time giving Uncle Val's a try. So let's see. Oh, Jennifer here.
I'm going to be on a plane tomorrow. I think I'm going to come pick some up for that price.
Mark, could you share again excuse me, the current pricing for the Botanical and the Restorative?
$29.99.
Yeah, we're on sale. The regular price is $36.99. We're on sale for $29.99. And as you mentioned, if you were intuitive enough to sign up on Zoom, you got the $5 off that you could use. So that would drop it down to $24.99. So I don't want Eric to fall off his chair, but we're probably one of the best prices in the country, not the lowest right now with the coupon. So
you are actually one of the lowest prices in the country. So
awesome. Jennifer here on Zoom has the Restorative mixed with some lemonade. It's her first time trying the Restorative. Jennifer, if you want to tell us what you think, we'd love to know in the comments. Let's see, we've got a couple other gin and tonics.
That's usually a good sign.
Sorry, Eric, what was that?
I said if it's an empty glass, that's usually a good sign.
Oh, yes. Oh, we've got a few beer drinkers on the line tonight. Sorry that you can't buy that at our stores, but you know, we've got all the gin and the wine you could need. Awesome.
As long as everyone is enjoying responsibly, that's all we ask. You know, we certainly would encourage you to try Uncle Val's. It really is a fantastic product. And the beauty is too, the fact that we do have the 3 expressions with 2 available currently in New Hampshire. You can really try some different flavor profiles. For the holidays, I would strongly encourage doing a Negroni with Uncle Val's Restorative, a Rojo Vermouth or a dry vermouth, as well as Campari or Cappelletti. Campari, you know, it's a great product, you know, but you can really mix up your Negroni using Campari, Aperol, Cappelletti, but always use Uncle Val's. Any other questions that I can answer?
No, it looks like we've answered all the questions. I mean, we do have a few people who just joined on Facebook. I feel terrible because we're just like wrapping up. For those of you just joining us on Facebook, don't worry. We will have the replay available For those of you watching on Facebook, it will be on Facebook. It'll be up on our YouTube over the weekend as well. There have been a couple of questions here on Zoom just about the coupon. It looks like a couple people may have registered after the coupon was first sent, so don't worry, you will get that again tomorrow morning in a thank you email to thank you for coming to the event. And so just for everybody watching on Facebook who is thinking like, oh, why didn't I get a coupon? You just have to pre-register so we can email you. We don't have a way to send it to you if we don't have your email address. So all of our 90 Days Around the World events are free, but if you pre-register, you're eligible to receive coupons and be entered for event night giveaways. So I'd like to just thank Eric so much for joining us tonight. He was with us a couple weeks ago too. We, Mark and I have really enjoyed spending this time with you. Love to keep up the every other week hanging out together thing we have going right now. So submit some more events
want me to
for
do
us.
another one, just say the word and I'm in. We'll do an impromptu one. How's that?
That would be great. All right, everyone. So we appreciate you tuning in tonight. So for anybody who did have a follow-up question that they needed answered, I did post my email in the Zoom chat. So go ahead and email me with anything else that you need answered. I can resend you the coupon if you need it as well. And for those of you watching on Facebook, we appreciate you watching, tuning in tonight. We hope that everybody has a great weekend. We hope you go and try Uncle Val's. Please drink responsibly and stay tuned for the peppered and the new expression coming next spring.
And thank you both for the opportunity. We appreciate the continued support for all of you watching. Thanks for joining us tonight, and enjoy safely and have a great holiday.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.